What's the one sentence from a family member that still haunts you? He didn't yell, just said, "You were never supposed to know." I laughed back then, but now I get it, and I wish I didn't. I was 17 when he said it. My Uncle Jeremy, he wasn't the emotional type, didn't do hugs or compliments, but he'd always been solid, present, dependable, in that quiet way that makes you feel safe without even noticing it. He lived next door to us for most of my life, ever since my mom divorced his brother and moved back to her hometown. He helped fix our gutters, drove me to soccer practice, gave me my first job at his hardware store. He was the one adult who never made me feel like I had to earn my place. That sentence came out of nowhere. We were in his garage, sorting through old boxes of tools and fishing gear. I had pulled out a faded shoebox filled with photos and postcards, stuff from the late 80s mostly. One of the photos showed a group of people standing in front of a small White House, all smiling except for one guy on the far left, who looked like he didn't want to be in the picture. I pointed to him and said, "Who's that?" That's when Jeremy said it. Not annoyed, not angry, just, "Calm, you were never supposed to know." Then he took the photo from my hand and put it back in the box like it had never happened. I laughed because I thought he was joking. I assumed it was some weird family story I wasn't ready for, but something in his face made me pause. Like a flicker of something darker had slipped out before he could shove it back. After that, he changed, slowly. He stopped answering my texts, would cancel last minute if we had plans. Started drinking more. Not sloppy, just dull, muted. Like something inside him had gone offline. I didn't think much of it until a few months later when he was found dead in that same garage. Carbon monoxide poisoning. The police said it was probably an accident, the kind that happens when someone forgets to open the garage door while warming up their car in winter. But the engine wasn't running when they found him. The keys were in his pocket, and the note they said didn't exist. I saw it. My mom denied it, said there was no note, but I was the one who got there first before she called anyone. It was taped to the wall by his workbench. 5 words, "I kept my promise, Jess," that's it. No explanation, no context, just my name and those words. I didn't even tell her I saw it. I pulled it down, shoved it in my pocket, and never mentioned it again. At the funeral, my mom barely cried. I thought maybe she was in shock. But later that night, I heard her on the phone whispering to someone. We knew this might happen. Just don't say anything. That's when it started. The feeling that something in our family didn't add up. Over the next year, I became obsessed with finding out what Jeremy meant. What promise? What wasn't I supposed to know? I started digging into old family albums, asking questions no one wanted to answer. My grandma got vague. My mom shut down. Even my older cousins acted like they were dodging landmines. Then I found the postcard. It was buried in a box of my baby photos, stuck between 2 plastic sleeves. It was addressed to Jeremy. Postmarked 1991, no return address. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible. It said, "It's done. Tell her she's safe. Burn this." I turned the card over. The picture was of a White House. The same house from the photo I'd seen in Jeremy's garage. The same house with the man who wasn't supposed to be in the picture. I didn't know what any of it meant yet, but I knew where the house was. I remembered it vaguely from trips as a kid. An old house by the river, about 40 minutes from where we lived. Jeremy used to take me there to fish, but we never went inside. He said it was just storage. One weekend when I knew my mom would be away, I drove out to it. The road was still gravel, overgrown on both sides. The mailbox was rusted, the number peeled off. I had to force the door open with my shoulder. The lock had rusted through, inside. The air smelled like dust and old paper. Furniture covered in sheets, windows yellowed from age. But everything was perfectly preserved. Like someone had been keeping it just clean enough to pretend it didn't exist. I searched for hours, found nothing, until I opened the closet in the back bedroom. Behind the hanging coats there was a wooden panel. It looked newer than the rest of the wall. I pried it loose with a screwdriver. Behind it was a shoebox. Inside the shoebox were VHS tapes, 11 of them, each labeled with dates from the early 90s. No titles, no names, just dates. I didn't have a way to watch them, not right away, so I took them home and found an old VCR on Craigslist that night. The next day I watched the first one. It was a recording of the house, the living room specifically. The angle was static like a surveillance camera. At first nothing happened. Then a woman walked into frame. She looked familiar, but it took me a few seconds to place her. It was my mom, younger, maybe early 20s, holding a baby. She looked nervous. She sat down on the couch, stared straight ahead for a full minute, then whispered, "I'm doing this for her." She kissed the baby on the forehead, stood up and walked out of frame. The screen stayed on the empty couch for the next 4 minutes. Then the tape cut. The second tape was dated a week later. Same room, same angle. This time a man entered. The same man from the photo in the garage. He didn't look at the camera. He just walked in, picked up the baby and walked out. No words, no expression, just took her. I stopped the tape. My hands were shaking. I knew it wasn't me. The dates didn't match my birthday. But something in my gut told me I was watching the beginning of a lie my whole life had been built around. and I wasn't sure I wanted to know what came next. The third tape was the one that made everything feel real. Not just eerie or confusing, real, like the floor had dropped out beneath me. It showed the same room, different day. My mom again, alone this time. She looked straight at the camera and said, "You promised. If anything happens, you raise her as yours. She'll never know." Then she paused, covered her mouth like she was about to cry, and added, "Jess can never know who her real father is. Not now, not after what he did." I paused the tape and stared at the frozen frame. Her eyes looked straight through me. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think. I played the rest of the tapes over the next 3 days, locking my door, unplugging the TV when I wasn't watching, closing the blinds like someone might be out there watching me watch them. Every tape built on the last, quiet conversations, documents laid out on the table, arguments just out of frame, footage of that man pacing through the house with a cigarette and a limp, always checking the windows like he was waiting for someone to come back. But none of it answered the question burning in my brain. Who was he, and what had he done? The last tape was different. It wasn't filmed in the house. It was outside near the river behind the property. The footage was grainier, shakier, like someone was holding the camera instead of mounting it. 2 men were arguing. One was Jeremy, the other was the man from the photo. Their voices were muffled by wind, but you could catch words. "She's your responsibility now, and if you tell her, it's not just you she'll hate." Then Jeremy grabbed the man's arm and said, "Clear as day, you were never supposed to come back." The tape ended there, just static. I sat there for hours staring at the blue screen. My entire life I had been told my father died in a car accident before I was born. A simple story, clean, convenient. But now I wasn't so sure he was dead at all. I confronted my mom that weekend. Didn't tell her about the tapes, just asked directly, "Is Dad really dead?" She froze. Didn't say a word for a long time. Then she said, "Why would you ask that?" I told her I found something in the house by the river. Her eyes changed instantly, like a mask slipping. She didn't ask what, didn't ask why I was there. She just said, "He didn't deserve to be your father." Then she turned and walked away. That night I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I didn't answer. They left a voicemail. It was a man's voice, raspy, tired. He said, "She kept the tapes, didn't she? You weren't supposed to see them. But if you did, then you already know what I did. And if you really want answers, come alone." No name, no location. Just that. And the next day, a piece of paper was slid under my door. No envelope. Just a scribbled address. A storage unit on the edge of town. I sat with that paper in my hand all night. I didn't tell anyone. Not even my best friend. I knew that once I stepped into that unit, I couldn't unlearn whatever I was about to find. Some things, once you see them, can't be unseen. Some truths don't set you free. They put you in a box you never asked to climb into, but I went. Of course I did. Because he was right. I already knew what he did. I just needed him to say it out loud, and I needed to look him in the eye when he did. The storage facility was one of those silent, lifeless places that felt like it had absorbed too many secrets over the years. Long rows of corrugated steel doors, all padlocked, all the same. The kind of place no one notices, no one questions. I parked 2 rows back, sat in the car for a while, watching. Nothing moved, no cars, no people. Just that heavy late afternoon stillness that makes your skin itch. The unit number was 117. The paper didn't come with a key, but the padlock on the door was already off, just hanging there, unlatched. Like someone had been waiting. I opened it slowly. The inside was dark but clean. Boxes stacked neatly, a folding chair, a TV on a stand with a built-in VCR, and sitting in the chair, like he'd been there for hours, was the man from the tapes, my mother's ghost, my uncle's secret, my father. He looked older than I imagined. Thinner. His hair was gray now, face hollowed by time and hard years, but I knew it was him the moment he looked at me. Same eyes, same jaw, and he didn't act surprised. He just nodded once, almost like he was relieved. "You found it," he said. I didn't answer. I just stood there, arms stiff at my sides, heart thudding in my throat. "She told me you'd be smart enough to stay away," he said. I guess she was wrong about that. I asked him why the lies? Why the vanishing? Why the tapes? He didn't respond right away. He just pointed to the TV. "You want to know the truth? It's on there, all of it." He handed me a remote. I sat down. My hands felt numb. I pressed play. This tape wasn't like the others. It was filmed in a basement, unfinished walls, exposed insulation, a single light bulb overhead. The camera was set up facing a metal table, and sitting at that table was him, but younger, probably early 30s, dressed in prison orange. Hands cuffed to the table. His voice was low, tired. "My name is Daniel. I worked for the county from 1987 to 1990. In July of that year, I was accused of something I didn't do. The records say I took a plea deal. That's not true. The records were changed." He paused. "There was a judge, a family, people with connections. My name was easier to throw under the bus. They promised I'd be out in 5 years if I kept my mouth shut. Then they disappeared me." He looked straight at the camera. "I'm making this tape in case they try to erase me again." The video cut to a second scene. A grainy shot of a file, birth certificates, arrest reports, medical forms. My name was on one of them, my mother's signature, but not his. It had been blacked out. The last scene was short. It showed a woman, my mother, standing in a courtroom hallway, no sound, just a timestamp, June 12, 1991. She was holding my hand. I couldn't have been more than a few months old. Behind her, two men in suits spoke quietly, then handed her an envelope. She didn't open it. She just nodded, turned around and walked out of frame. The tape stopped. The screen went black. He sat beside me in silence. Then he said, "They told her I was dangerous, that if she wanted you to be safe I had to disappear." I asked him if any of it was true, if he really was dangerous. He looked down at his hands. "Once," he said, "but not in the way they meant." I asked what happened, what he did. He just said, "I tried to fix something I never should have touched. And people got hurt. Not the ones I wanted, but people." I didn't ask more. I don't think I wanted to know the details. Sometimes not knowing is the only protection you have left. I stood up. My head felt like it was packed with static. He didn't try to stop me, just said, "Tell your mom I kept my promise." I walked out and didn't look back. Not once. I still don't know everything. I don't know who those men in the hallway were. I don't know what Jeremy promised or who else was involved. But I know this: my life was never mine. It was a story rewritten by people who thought silence was safer than truth. And now that I know, I'm not sure what to do with it. I haven't told my mom. I haven't gone back to that house by the river. The tapes are locked in a box under my bed. I haven't watched them since, but I think about that sentence every day. He didn't yell, just said, "You were never supposed to know." And he was right. I wasn't, but I do. And it changed everything after that day. Everything felt off in ways I couldn't explain. Conversations with my mom felt colder, shorter, like we were both pretending not to be holding a loaded secret in our mouths. I kept trying to trick myself into thinking things could go back to normal, that if I just didn't say anything, if I kept my head down and let the silence settle, it would all fade. But silence doesn't settle, it rots. I started noticing small things first. Mail that looked like it had been opened and resealed. My laptop staying warm even when I hadn't used it. One morning I woke up and the drawer where I kept the tapes was open. Nothing was taken, nothing moved, but I knew I hadn't opened it. I changed the lock on my door. I started sleeping with the box under my bed. I bought a cheap security camera and pointed it at the hallway outside my room. A week later, the camera was gone. No note, no explanation, just gone. I didn't tell anyone, not even Laura, the only friend I had who knew parts of the truth. She had her own reasons to stay quiet. Her mom used to work for the county too, back in the early 90s. When I told her about the courtroom footage, she went pale. Said her mom once mentioned a case that got cleaned up real fast, like it had somewhere more important to be. She didn't ask for names, didn't want to know. That was the thing I started realizing. People in this town remembered just enough to know what not to talk about. Like the line had been passed down from parent to child. Don't ask about the house by the river. Don't mention Jeremy's garage. Don't say Daniel Hammond's name. But I was already too deep. One night a white envelope was slid under my front door. Just like before. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, no header, no signature. "Leave it alone. He stayed away for a reason, you should too." That was it. I waited by the door with a bat for hours after that. Nothing, no sound. But the fear didn't leave. I kept thinking about the man in the tapes, my biological father, and the look in his eyes when he said he'd tried to fix something he shouldn't have touched. I thought about Jeremy, about the note he left taped to the wall. I kept my promise, Jess. What promise? To keep me safe. From what? From who? I started to wonder if maybe the scariest part wasn't what they were hiding, but how long they'd been willing to lie to protect it. I began to piece together timelines, when Jeremy took me in, when the tapes stopped, when that courtroom video was dated, and something didn't add up. There was a 6-month gap where no one could tell me where my mom lived. She claimed we stayed with her cousin in Oregon. But her cousin moved to Michigan in 1989 and never came back, and the hospital where I was supposedly born doesn't have a birth record for my name that matches the date on my certificate. I pulled the certificate out of my drawer, looked at it in daylight for the first time in years, and then I saw it, the signature from the attending physician, scanned, not inked. It had been added digitally. I checked the hospital's record system using a friend's login. That physician retired in 1987. I was born in 1991. My birth certificate is fake, or at least doctored. I sat on that for days, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, just stared at that piece of paper, trying to understand what that meant. Was I adopted? Was I born under another name? Was there another version of me buried in some locked cabinet in a building that no longer existed? One night I broke. I drove back to the river house. I don't know what I thought I'd find, maybe another tape, a letter, something hidden I'd missed. But the house was different. The front door was boarded up. There was yellow tape stretched across the porch. No signs of life, no cops, no press, just emptiness. And one note nailed to the door, handwritten in thick black marker. "You already know enough, don't make this worse." That's when I realized this wasn't about protecting me anymore. It was about control, about making sure the story never unraveled. I drove home in silence, deleted my search history, burned copies of the tapes, hid the originals in a safety deposit box under a fake name, and I stopped asking questions, at least out loud, but I still hear that sentence every time I close my eyes. He didn't yell, just said, "You were never supposed to know." And now I do. I thought maybe if I ignored it long enough it would fade, that somehow the weight of what I knew would get lighter with time. Like all the other things we pretend didn't happen in this family, but knowing something that was never meant for you is like carrying a loaded gun with no safety. You can try to hide it, lock it away, pretend it's not there, but you still feel its weight in every room you enter. And one day it goes off. For me, it happened during Thanksgiving, a small family dinner, just me, my mom, and her new husband Doug. The tension was already high, like it always was when we had to play pretend. Doug kept trying to bring up politics. My mom kept pretending I was her little girl who hadn't been watching her lie since she was old enough to read. I was just trying to get through it. Then she said it, casual, unprovoked. "You were always such an easy baby, quiet, barely cried. It's like you knew the world was already too heavy." Doug laughed. I didn't. I looked up and asked, "Is that why you changed my name?" The silence that followed wasn't long, but it was loud. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, just took a sip of wine and said, "That wasn't a decision I made lightly." Doug looked confused, like he'd just walked into the middle of a movie. "Wait, what does she mean?" My mom looked at me, and for the first time in years I saw something like fear on her face. Or maybe it was exhaustion. "What do you want, Jess? You want me to apologize for keeping you safe, for trying to give you a life that wasn't built on someone else's mistakes?" "I want the truth," I said. "All of it, not the parts you think I can handle." She stood up, took her plate to the sink, and without looking at me said, "Then you'd better be ready to hear things you can't unhear." That was the last thing she said to me for weeks. I left that night without saying goodbye. She didn't call, neither did Doug. But I didn't stop digging. I started contacting people, quietly, through old college contacts, people who still had friends in city records in law enforcement. I requested sealed documents under fake names. I paid for background checks. I traced the judge who signed off on the custody transfer in 1991. Dead. Stroke. 2 years after I was born, I found the court clerk who processed the papers, retired, living in Arizona. I flew there under the pretense of a documentary project and met her at a diner just off the highway. She didn't remember my case at first, but when I showed her a copy of the birth certificate and the court date, she went pale. That day, she said, there were men in suits who didn't work for the county. They stayed in the judge's chambers the whole time. When it was over, the paperwork was gone. We didn't keep copies. We were told not to. I asked if she remembered anything else. She shook her head. "Just one thing. Your mother didn't cry. Most moms cry when they sign away custody. She didn't." I flew home that night and stayed up until morning rewatching the last tape, the one in the basement. I kept pausing it at the same moment, when Daniel looked into the camera and said they didn't erase me, they just rewrote everything around me. It finally made sense. They hadn't hidden me from him. They'd hidden him from me. And they'd made sure that every legal record, every trace of truth, was buried under a mountain of carefully crafted lies. My life wasn't stolen. It was redesigned. And I wasn't the only one. I found 3 other names through court logs, children whose paperwork had been processed the same week as mine. 2 were adopted through closed agencies. 1 had no records at all. I reached out to them. 1 wrote back. Her name was Ellie. She was 2 years older than me. She said she'd been asking the same questions for years, and every time she got close, something happened. Her laptop was wiped. Her landlord evicted her for no reason. Her adoptive parents changed their phone numbers. We met in person. She showed me a letter unsigned left in her mailbox a month earlier. It said, "Don't let curiosity bury you. Some things are kept secret because they have to be." The handwriting was shaky, familiar. I showed her the photo of the note Jeremy left me. Same hand, same pressure. Jeremy had known about all of us, not just me. We were part of something bigger, something manufactured, deliberate, not some random family scandal, a system. I don't know who was behind it yet. I don't know how many people were bought off, silenced, erased. But I do know this: the more you dig, the more you start to understand why people lie. Not to protect themselves, but to protect the stories they need you to believe. Because the truth ruins everything. And sometimes that's the point. Ellie and I started meeting regularly. Never at the same place twice, never the same time of day. We kept everything offline, used burner phones, encrypted folders, handwritten notes. It sounds paranoid, I know. But once you realize your own life story has been curated like a script, it becomes impossible to trust that you're not still being watched, nudged, redirected. Ellie had found patterns I hadn't. Patterns in the paperwork, in the custody filings, the same notary signatures, the same social workers who conveniently vanished years later, the same courthouse typists and document handlers. It was like someone had used the legal system like a rubber stamp for quiet, permanent erasures. The kind no one questions because they wear the right badge, file the right forms, and speak the right language. She also found something I'd missed. Photos, newspaper clippings of so-called closed adoptions that made it into the society section back in the early 90s. One photo stopped me cold. It was a charity gala hosted by a county judge. In the background, half-blurred, was a woman in a green dress holding a baby. My mom, holding me. The caption had names I didn't recognize. But Ellie pointed to one of the men smiling beside her. "That's Henry Callan," she said. "Used to be a DA, retired early, bought a property out near the lake. Nobody's seen him in years." I asked why that mattered. She pulled out a manila folder and laid it on the table. Inside were 6 birth certificates, each showing a different child, each with a different name. All filed within an 8-month period, all signed off by the same hospital administrator. And in the corner of each, a mark, barely noticeable, a stamp shaped like a small crescent moon. The same mark was in the corner of mine. We didn't know what it meant, but we knew it meant something. We dug into Callan's old cases. Buried deep in court records, Ellie found testimony from a whistleblower who claimed that certain children were being redirected out of the foster system. Not placed, redirected. His name was Philip Dern. He'd worked in intake services. Claimed that some kids were never processed through state systems at all, that they went directly to clearance. His words. The testimony was sealed. But the file wasn't. We found his address. Or what was left of it. His house had burned down in 2003. Electrical fire, cause undetermined. He didn't make it out, neither did his records. Ellie and I started sleeping in shifts. We kept the tapes in separate locations, backup drives buried in different cities. I never told my mom I was still looking. I couldn't. Every time I tried to picture the conversation, all I could see was the way she looked at me when she said, "Then you'd better be ready to hear things you can't unhear." But I needed more. I went back to the river house one last time. I wasn't expecting anything new. I just needed to feel the silence again, to remember what had started this. The house was colder than I remembered. The walls seemed tighter, the air heavier. In the back room, behind the closet panel where I'd found the tapes, there was something I hadn't noticed before. A second panel, thinner, painted to match the wall. I pulled it back and found a bundle of envelopes, wrapped in twine, labeled in Jeremy's handwriting, for Jess, if it gets bad. My throat closed, my hands shook. I opened the first letter. He wrote like he spoke, brief, direct, with the weight of someone who had already regretted everything. "I never wanted to be part of this. But I couldn't let them take you. Your mother made a choice, I made mine. You'll find the rest in the red tin." The red tin was in the attic, covered in insulation, taped beneath a support beam. Inside were photocopies of forms, transcripts of conversations, even a photograph of a group meeting that looked like it had been taken through a window. Jeremy had been watching them, all of them. He knew who was involved, he knew what had been done, and he'd kept records, quietly, systematically, like he always knew one day it would fall to me to finish what he couldn't. I didn't cry, not yet. I just packed everything into my bag, drove back to the storage unit, and scanned every page. Ellie and I agreed we couldn't go public, not yet. We needed to understand what we had, who these people were, what they wanted. Because now it wasn't just about us. There were other names in those files, dozens, people still out there, living lives built on someone else's silence. And maybe they didn't want to know. Maybe they'd rather believe the story they were given. I would have too, if Jeremy hadn't let that one sentence slip. He didn't yell, just said, "You were never supposed to know," and now I did, and we weren't done. Not even close. Ellie and I started to build what we called the map. A hand-drawn diagram with every name, every alias, every location, every date we could verify. Jeremy's notes were detailed but scattered, like he'd been collecting puzzle pieces without knowing what the full picture looked like. With them, we found connections between families who never should have crossed paths. A foster home in 1989 that supposedly closed after a fire, but whose director resurfaced 5 years later under a different name in another state, listed as the legal guardian for a child born under one of the Crescent Moon stamped certificates. A physician whose name kept showing up on documents years after he died. An adoption agency that existed on paper but had no physical address, no staff, and no tax filings. There was even a woman listed as my emergency contact in early school records who I'd never heard of before. She lived 2 counties over and had worked briefly as a clerk at a juvenile court until her entire personnel file vanished from the system. When Ellie tried to contact her, the number was disconnected. The day after she left a voicemail, her car was broken into. Nothing taken. Just her glove box emptied, and the tapes we kept in her trunk were left on the passenger seat, all of them just placed there. Like a warning, we stopped using names after that, switched to initials, got a second set of burner phones, only met in person. We were careful, but careful doesn't mean safe. Because something about this didn't feel like history anymore. It felt active, like it was still alive, like someone was still managing it, preserving it, and like they were aware we'd gotten too close. One night I came home to find my front door slightly ajar. Nothing looked disturbed, nothing stolen, but someone had been inside. The only thing different was a single manila envelope left on the kitchen table. Inside was a photo me, age 5, standing outside a playground I don't remember ever visiting. Behind me in the photo, partially obscured by a tree, was the man from the tapes, my biological father. I didn't show it to Ellie. I didn't tell my mom. I just put it in a drawer and locked it. Because if that photo was real, if he'd been watching me back then either my mom had lied more than I thought or he never left. I started looking into missing persons cases, ones involving children, ones that never made the news, ones dismissed as custody disputes or runaways. I found 3 that matched the pattern, all from the same 10-year window, all in counties connected to the same handful of judges, clerks, and administrators. 2 of the children were never found. One resurfaced years later with no memory of her early life. That girl had been adopted into a wealthy family with political ties, and when she turned 21 and tried to file paperwork to find her birth parents, she was told her records had been sealed permanently by court order. No appeal allowed. Her name was Lena. Ellie and I met her in a small cafe just outside her university campus. She was skeptical at first. We knew too much about her. But when we showed her the moon stamp on her certificate, she went pale, then angry, then quiet. She told us about the recurring nightmares she'd had as a child. About a man she couldn't remember but always described the same way. Tall, limping, wearing a white coat. We showed her one of the photos from the red tin. She went white, said nothing for a long time, then asked what happens if we tell someone. We didn't have an answer, because we weren't even sure who counted as someone anymore. Law enforcement? Useless. Politicians? Complicit. Press? We'd already tried reaching out to one journalist. Her inbox was shut down 3 days later. The paper she worked for retracted her last article. Her byline vanished from the website. It wasn't a conspiracy theory. It wasn't paranoia. This was a system built on erasure, and it was still operating. And now we were part of the story. Not because we wanted to be, but because someone decided we were worth hiding the truth from, and because of that, we couldn't stop. We owed it to Jeremy, to the kids whose names never made it into a file, to ourselves, even if it meant disappearing next, because the one sentence that started all of this was never just a warning, it was a confession. He didn't yell, just said, "You were never supposed to know." And we weren't, but we knew we were running out of time. Every step we took seemed to tighten the noose around us. Our computers started crashing during video calls. Cloud files disappeared overnight. Even encrypted drives showed signs of tampering. Subtle changes in folder dates. Files corrupted without explanation. Ellie moved twice in 1 month after noticing the same black SUV parked outside her apartment at night. I stopped going to familiar places altogether. I'd eat in my car, sleep with the documents tucked into the floor panel, and keep a burner in my coat in case I had to dump it mid-walk. It sounds extreme. Unless you've ever felt the edge of something breathing down your neck without a face, then it's just survival. We shifted focus. If we couldn't expose it from the top, we'd start at the base. We tried to track money, county budgets, closed foundations, grants that were approved but never executed. The names that popped up on the audit reports were always the same 5 or 6 surnames. Men and women who had long since retired, relocated, or died under vague circumstances. There were patterns of property transfers, especially storage facilities, abandoned schools, former mental health centers, buildings that existed on paper but hadn't been occupied in decades. On a hunch, we visited one of them, an old county juvenile center decommissioned in '97. The doors had rusted off their hinges. Vines crawled through the broken windows. But inside, behind the old intake desk, there was a file cabinet, still locked. Ellie picked it. We found 3 folders. Inside were photos, old medical files, and intake forms for minors who never appeared in public records. Some of the forms had been signed by familiar names. Others had no signatures at all, just stamps. The crescent moon again. Always the crescent moon. That same night, Ellie got a text from a number we hadn't used in weeks. No words, just a photo of the 2 of us standing outside the building. Taken less than an hour earlier. We were done pretending we weren't being watched. We backed up everything to multiple drives and sent them to 3 people we trusted in 3 different states. Not lawyers, not journalists, just people who believed us enough to keep it safe. People who owed favors to Jeremy or remembered enough to be scared. Then we started writing everything. A full timeline, a list of names, a breakdown of each connection, a file labeled if we disappear that included access codes and location details. We made plans to release it if either of us went silent for more than 72 hours. It felt like insurance. But deep down, we knew it wouldn't protect us. They didn't threaten us directly anymore. They didn't need to. The silence around us was louder than any warning. Friends stopped replying to texts. My mom stopped answering my calls completely. When I finally drove to her house, it was empty. Half-packed boxes in the kitchen, lights off, no forwarding address, just a note left taped to the mirror in my childhood bedroom. "It's better this way. You're not safe here." The handwriting was hers. I haven't seen her since. A week later, a letter arrived at the P.O. box we used for our research. No return address. Postmarked from a nearby town, inside was a single photograph, one I'd never seen before. I was maybe 2 years old, sitting on someone's lap. The man holding me wasn't Jeremy, wasn't my mother. It was Daniel, my father. His face wasn't pixelated. He wasn't hiding. He looked proud, calm. The back of the photo had just 3 words. She knew everything. That night I watched the final tape again, not because I hoped to see something new, but because I needed to hear it in his voice one last time. That tired, broken voice saying the sentence that cracked my entire world in half. You were never supposed to know. And I finally understood. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a regret. It was an anchor, a truth too heavy for the surface, but now I'm holding it, and I don't know if I'm supposed to carry it forward or drown with it. He didn't yell, just said, "You were never supposed to know." I laughed back then. But now I get it, and I wish I didn't. It's been 8 months since I found the last tape, since my mother vanished, since I stopped sleeping through the night. Ellie's gone too. Not like missing, just gone. She told me she'd disappear if it got too close, and it did. The last message I got from her just said, "Stay quiet for a while." We rattled something, and then nothing. I don't leave things out anymore. My laptop is always off unless I'm using it. My phone has no real contacts, no sync data. I use cache. I walk different routes home. I haven't spoken to my neighbors in weeks, and I don't open mail I didn't expect. That probably sounds paranoid. But once you've seen how easily people are erased, and I don't mean killed, I mean rewritten, it doesn't feel like paranoia. It feels like learning how to breathe with one lung. I still have the files, the copies, the backups. Most of them are offline now, printed, hidden. They're not even the important part anymore. The part one can't stop carrying isn't in a folder, it's the weight of memory. The sound of his voice, the way my mom's face changed when I told her I'd found the house. The realization that every time I thought I was asking too many questions, I was still only scratching the surface. There are no answers at the bottom of this. Just more stories. People whose names have been scrubbed from paper but still show up in someone's dreams. Children who never knew they weren't really adopted. Families built on paperwork that was never supposed to survive long enough to be questioned. And somewhere, a group of people who decided at some point that the truth was less important than control. I don't know who they are. Not all of them. I have initials, patterns, habits, but not enough to stop anything. Not without getting more people hurt. Jeremy understood that. That's why he left what he did the way he did. Why he never told me directly. He wasn't just trying to protect me, he was warning me. He knew that once I started asking, I wouldn't be able to stop. That's what that sentence really was. A line, a door. And once I stepped through it, I'd never go back to not knowing. I haven't watched the tapes in weeks. They're stored now, in a place I won't name in case this gets found. But I remember every frame, every breath, every word. Sometimes I think about destroying them, burning it all, letting the silence swallow everything again. But then I remember that this silence isn't natural. It's curated, built, maintained, and people paid for it, with lives, with names, with the right to tell their own story. So I keep it, quietly, not to expose anyone. I'm not trying to go viral. I don't want interviews or attention. I just want it written somewhere. That someone saw it, lived in it, survived it, sort of. And if you're reading this and thinking it sounds like fiction, I get it. I wouldn't believe it either, if I hadn't opened that box, if I hadn't knocked on that door, if I hadn't heard my mother say that sentence with a calm so terrifying it made everything after it feel inevitable. You were never supposed to know. That's what this was built on, not just my story. Dozens of others, maybe hundreds. People who walk around with names they didn't choose, birthdays that don't match, parents who flinch when certain questions get asked. It doesn't end. There's no twist waiting at the finish line, no arrests, no confessions, no final tape that explains it all. There's just this knowing and what you do with it once it's yours.